As the summit opened yesterday, we reflected on the leadership challenges that have occurred over the last year in this country and in the world for that matter. We've examined some very timely topics: healthcare, the role of government in the public sector, media, and ethics and governance. Now it's time to look ahead to the future. And how can we, as Villanova alumni, use our positions as leaders in businesses, in our communities, and places of worship to bring about positive change for the benefit of all people? And how can we as alumni support Villanova in achieving its goal of developing the leaders of tomorrow? To introduce our next panel, it's my pleasure to introduce the president-elect of the Villanova Alumni Association, who I mentioned yesterday. Bob Burns is a member of the class of 1976. Among the many hats that Bob has worn in his Alumni Association role, he's become the patron saint of the university shop and has introduced a number of new ways of thinking. And I guess the best evidence of this is if you get a chance to go up to the bookstore, you will see khaki pants that have embroidered V's all over them. And I was talking with Ken Velosky about them, and he said he was wondering, where did those pants come from? And he said the bookstore manager said, well, it was Bob Burns' idea. And the senior vice president of finance administration said, I've asked them to get a number of items in the bookstore, and they never listen to me. But Bob Burns makes one phone call, and there's pants with V's all over them. So it's my great pleasure to introduce one of our visionaries in the Alumni Association, Bob Burns.
Before I introduce the panel, I would like to, as one of my hats as the Corporate Partners Committee Chair, I would like to take a moment to thank the sponsors of this event. You see their names on the placards around Connolly Hall. This event obviously had some expense to it, and those individuals stepped up big time. We asked them to, Mike is here, I'm sure, we said, please contribute for this event, but don't let it affect your normal annual giving. So without their support and generosity, this event would not have taken place. In addition, I would be remiss if I did not mention the former alumni board presidents that are in the room today, and I would ask them to take a quick bow for us. John Smock, Bill Savino, Denise Devine, if you would, round of applause. I can tell you that we are certainly standing on their shoulders. This event would not have taken place without their former leadership. Lastly, before I introduce the panel, I can tell you that the brainchild of this event and the person who was the driving force, this event would definitely not have been a reality if it hadn't been for the strong efforts and the hard work of our current Alumni Board President and Trustee, Mr. Paul Tufano. He's been spectacular. To begin this discussion, I would like to introduce our next panel entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Defining the DNA of Tomorrow's Leader. Moderating the panel, and I'm honored to introduce Dr. Alfonso Ortega, Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research in the College of Engineering. Our alumni panelists are Mr. Steve Christini, class of 1995, President of Christini Technologies, and Mr. Peter Fong, class of 86 and class of 95, a member of the Board of Directors of the Alumni Association and the former President, CEO of Chrysler Brand and U.S. Sales, Chrysler Group, LLC. Thank you.
Well, I'm surrounded on my right and my left by two very distinguished gentlemen, and you'll immediately notice that they're younger than me. So that tells you something about the tenure of our discussion. And that is a continuation of our discussion from yesterday, which is the DNA of our leadership, what leadership is composed of. And today's discussion in this panel will be what would be the DNA of tomorrow's leaders, what would be the makeup of people who will be leading us into the future. But before launching into that discussion, which I will let my distinguished colleagues lead us into, I'd like to reflect a little bit about what we've already learned. First of all, I'm going to own up to something, and that's in front of my dean here, Gary Gabriel. And that is one of Gary's pet projects, one of his initiatives is institutionalizing leadership in our college. That is, making leadership training one of the initiatives that our college, College of Engineering, excels in. And I must say that I was skeptical about that, although I never told Gary, but now I am. And not because I don't believe in leadership. I believe in strong leadership as strongly as anybody, but because I'm skeptical that it can be taught. And as I have listened, however, to comments today and yesterday, I realize that clearly I am wrong about that, because I was taught yesterday and I was taught today. And I'm already mid-career and past it. I'm flying to the moon, as I like to say. And yet I learned some things that I hadn't learned before. And so there it goes out the window. So Gary, let's go. Let's go forward with that. I'd like to reflect a little bit on, I guess, DNA. And if you think about the Human Genome Project, which is one of the true successes of scientific leadership in our century, it has managed to map out the DNA of the human being. And maybe using that context, we might ask ourselves, if we were looking then at that human genome, which parts of that human genome would we keep, and which ones might we manipulate a little bit to create tomorrow's leader? I thought I would make a few comments from what I have learned and heard the last 2 days. So in thinking about tomorrow's leaders, here are some genes that I probably would leave alone. I wouldn't touch them. The very first one, the one I feel very strongly about, is one of those big boulders that John Paul Jones was talking about yesterday, one of those that you wouldn't want to touch. And I would say my number one choice is courage. You wouldn't want to touch whatever gene is responsible for imbuing this property on humans, courage. And the reason that I say that is because I honestly do not think that you can lead effectively without courage. I'd like to just give you 3 examples of courage that are some of my favorite examples. They're a little bit different from what I have heard. I just thought I would give it a little bit different spin, okay? We're in the middle of baseball season and we love it, right? Although Phillies lost today, unfortunately. In 1946, there were no black players in baseball. In 1946 was the year that Branch Rickey, then at the time the manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, had the courage to name his first baseman to be Jackie Robinson, as you all know. And he did this under a lot of pressure and under a lot of scrutiny, and yet he had the courage to step up and name an African-American player to be his first baseman, thereby breaking the color line in professional baseball. And so here we are rooting for our Phillies, or our whatever team you root for. I hope it's Phillies. And I would just look at our team, and I would ask you, well, who here would not agree that it's great to have Jimmy Rollins at shortstop and Ryan Howard at first base, both African Americans, and Carlos Ruiz behind the plate, and Pedro Feliz at third base, both Latinos? Who among us would agree that who disagree that that's not a great composure? But wait, we have a native Pacific Islander out in center field, the Flying Hawaiian. So who among us would not admit to ourselves and agree that we have a really interesting team? And not only that, they're all great human beings. So how about that for a great team to root for? I am a newcomer to the area, and one of the greatest things about moving to the area is having the Phillies to root for. I have to say that was a real gift. Here's another one that's a little bit more personal. In 1966, I was growing up as a kid in El Paso, Texas. One of our former panelists sort of revealed that secret. I was out there in West Texas in that dusty country, and in 1966, a miraculous thing happened in my city. Our local basketball team, which played for Texas Western College, which was our local basketball team, they went national. The 1966 Texas Western College basketball team won the national championship. Do you remember that? Maybe some of you might know this little fact of sports lore. At the time, I was a 6th grader. I didn't know that I had just witnessed a watershed moment in American sports, but in fact we had, because our coach, Don the Bear Haskins, who was later enshrined as a Hall of Fame coach in the Basketball Hall of Fame, he did something that took an incredible amount of courage. He started 5 black basketball players on that team, and it was the first time that had ever been done. And in the National Basketball Championship, you may recall, those of you that follow these sorts of things, they played an all-white basketball team playing for the University of Kentucky. And lucky for us El Pasoans, we won, and we went crazy, crazy with happiness. I remember at the time, I did not know that we had crossed a color line or that we had in any way experienced a watershed moment. All I knew was that Bobby Joe Hill was best point guard in the country, although there are some people who might claim JoJo White was better than him, but we beat them. And so I think it was Bobby Joe Hill. And so the lesson here, the lesson in courage and leadership is, I don't think here at Villanova we would be able to claim that Scotty Reynolds is the best point guard in the country now, had it not been for that kind of leadership and that kind of courage. And so I offer that to you as another example of courage. Here's one last one that is more personal to me as an academic person. My ears perked up this week because the 2009 Nobel Prize for Biology was announced. As you might know, the Nobel Prizes were announced this week. So I took a special note of the Nobel Prize in biology, and the Nobel Prize went to Blackburn, Grider, and Sostak. And Sostak, by the way, was a graduate student at the time, so yay, they actually recognized a Ph.D. student as part of the award. Well, this trio solved a very important problem in biology and genetics. They showed that chromosomes can be copied in a very systematic way during cell divisions, which is absolutely essential in order for cell division to occur. And they also showed how this happens without degrading that genome. In other words, how things replicate themselves exactly, which is a miraculous event. So that's what the citation said. But here's the thing that caught my attention. The way it's done is by something called, it's the ends of the chromosomes, which are called telomeres. Telomeres. Never heard of the word myself until I read the article this past week. It was a little known thing at the time. Here's the lesson in academic and intellectual leadership. The lesson is, at that time, nobody cared about this bit of research. Nobody had heard of a telomere, seen a telomere, or cared about a telomere. And yet at the time, these intellectual academic leaders worked on a subject that was pure science, that they believed in, and they knew had importance, and yet they had very little opportunity for funding because it wasn't the fashionable subject at the time that the National Science Foundation was funding, and yet they proceeded with their research. Now, I would tell you that is true intellectual leadership, to work on something that nobody really is funding or cares about at the time, because you in your own self know that it is an important subject. Well, I was very, very gratified and happy to know that these kinds of researchers working on pure science were recognized for their work eventually, because it changed the world. It eventually made such a huge difference in the way we understand human biology and, most importantly right now, aging. This is how it's had a huge influence in our understanding of the process. So, in my opinion then, courage is the one gene we shouldn't change on the human genome as you look forward into the future. And I'm sure my colleagues beside me will agree on that. Here's a couple of others. With courage, you have to have determination in order to effect change. You have to stick with it. And I think that those two bits of genes should be right next to each other because they are required in order to succeed as a leader. With those comes vision. And I think, I don't know whether it's a gene or not, but it is some kind of combination of genes that allows a person to be a visionary and have the courage to be able to be visionary, perhaps even in the light of skepticism. I think that is another very, very important gene that we should keep. This is one of the things I learned yesterday, and thank you for lifelong learning. This is what we try to teach our students. Okay? I learned that it's not just enough to be smart, you have to be wise. I guess I'd heard that, somewhere. But I think wisdom then is that other part of the gene that we shouldn't change. But here's something that I would enter. I'm not sure we can teach wisdom. And I'm not even sure it's on the genes. I'm not sure it's in the DNA. I think that is something we must acquire from experience. And so it might not be on that DNA strand, but it's something essential in order for leaders to succeed. A couple of others, and this has been coming up over and over again, and to me it speaks entirely about the center of Villanova, and that is a moral conscience. That is one of the genes that needs to stay on the DNA strand, is the gene that controls moral conscience. Okay. I'm not real big at telling my son things that he'll squirm at, things like ethics and morality. But the one lesson I always tell my son, and I've told him for many years, and that is, you know what true ethical behavior really is? And that is doing the right thing when no one is watching. Do the right thing when your parents aren't watching. So I would just maybe amend this a little bit, and given our conversations over the past 2 days, I would enter the following sort of amendment to our corporations, to corporate America. I think true ethical behavior in corporate America should be you do the right thing when no one is regulating you. How about that for a concept? Okay. I think it applies just as much as the lesson that I've tried to give to my son. And I'm glad that we're talking about those topics because those are important ones as we look into the future. So to sort of finish here, let me just say that we have really big challenges facing us, and tomorrow's leaders are going to have to lead us into those challenges. I wanted to share a few with you that are listed in the grand challenges of the National Academy of Engineering. I won't tell you all of them, but here are some of the things that we need to be worried about that are really important, and that we will take our entire generation, our next generation of leaders, to lead us into. Making solar energy affordable is on the list, I think for obvious reasons. Providing access to clean water to everybody is on the list, and I think that's for obvious reasons. Here's one that I think you can think about, but we may not realize as a population how important it is. Restoring and improving our urban infrastructure. Our urban infrastructure is falling apart literally right before our eyes. It's an important grand challenge that we're going to have to face up with. Some of you that are here, I've spoken with some of you, are in the pharmaceutical industry. Engineering better medicines is one of the grand challenges of our next generations. And in particular, in light of our aging population, this is one of the important things that we have to be able to address. One of the more esoteric and very interesting challenges is reverse engineering the brain. There are so many things we would be able to learn if we were able to understand how the human brain works, both from the point of view of helping us to keep the brain healthy and active well into our age, and at the same time using what we learn about the way the brain operates in developing new technology. There's so much to be learned there. It's one of the grand challenges. And this is a goofy one. I would throw this one in for fun, that it's enhanced virtual reality. Well, I think that one speaks to the gaming industry or something like that. But actually not. I think all of you read science articles about the future of virtual reality and the promises it might bring in the way we control and live within our environment. So those are some of my comments about where we are today, what things need to stay on there. And I'd like to ask first Steve and then Peter to share with us our comments about the human genome looking into the future. And they're especially appropriate people to speak to this subject because they've only been out for about 15 or 20 years. They were the future leaders just a short while ago, and now they are our leaders. So Steve.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I'd like to start by telling a little bit about my background and story because it's relative to where I am now and how quickly things have been changing for my small company and where we're going to be in the future. My company started as a result of Villanova, and I'm here because of everything that I learned here. I started as a senior design project, and we were fortunate enough to apply for some patents, get multiple patents. We have 6 international patents. Took a few years off while all that process started. And the technology was rather simple. It was a mountain bike at the time, and some of you may have read about this in the alumni letter. But it seemed like a simple process, but we were pushed by the other engineering professors to actually do something that wasn't very common at the time at Villanova, and fortunately is becoming more so, to take an idea that you develop here and kind of look into the future and what you can do with that. So we were guided by the professors to go ahead and try to make this an actual company. So I worked for a few years in corporate America, only 3 short years, and then I left in 98, and then we formed a company in 99. So it's been 10 years that we've been developing a technology, initially for mountain bikes and now for motorcycles. So although a much smaller industry. We're kind of in a parallel world. And it was a tough go of it at first, because much like we were talking about courage and one of the main things, I have to agree that that's probably one of the most important things going out there. There's so much changing. There's not the protection of corporate America that there once was. We had such a tough go of it when we first started, and many people telling us this isn't going to work. It's been tried for almost 100 years. We try to do something that many people have tried to do before, but I knew, and from the peers that were around me, that it's something that had the potential to become something great and something big. So playing on the courage thing, that was what kept me going in the early stages. And fortunately, I was able to surround myself shortly after we were able to get our first funding and things of that nature with some other very talented engineers and then some business people. And we built this little tiny company here in Philadelphia that, although we're still very small, has a worldwide presence. And what we do now has played into the fact that we have a big vision and are able to take all the experiences that we learned in the process and have product all over the world from a little idea that started here at Villanova. So, I'm very proud that the guidance that I had here has kept me focused on the end goal, and that's to take an idea and take all the people and listen to all the ideas that we have along the way and try to get it to the end goal of making this a product that'll be a baseline internationally, not just here. So that's an idea that has kind of kept the focus on where we're going. And there's a lot of, I have so many things I can talk about on the details of what we need to do going forward, because in these short 10 years that I started this company, I was here when the internet just started. And I remember having the story of a friend showing me what Yahoo was. And now I don't talk to my suppliers normally. It's all on email. And things are so different than they were even 10 years ago. And I think it's going to become more and more and more of that. So we'll certainly get into some more of these details of what I think each of the, as students and as other business leaders, we need to be very aware of. But I'd like to pass this over to Peter, because he's got a little bit more time at this than I do. So,
thanks, Steve. First of all, it's a homecoming for me. Some of you may know that I got off a plane about an hour and a half ago from the Motor City in Detroit, where Father Peter is very familiar with. And as of a week ago, I was the president and CEO of Chrysler brand, and as of today, I'm unemployed. So if you want to talk about courage, I think that's pretty appropriate when my wife, of over 14 years was wondering what I did a week ago when I decided, for personal reasons and for the right reasons, to step down in that role. But I can tell you that 23 years ago, when I left this campus, my first shot at leadership was a platoon commander in the ROTC unit. And from there, I joined the Navy and spent 8.5 very successful years flying Navy helicopters. And little did I know that I'd leave the military world and gain all the experience that I gained doing so. And I wound up right back here at Villanova teaching leadership and management in the ROTC program, which I graduated from. And then I was recruited by Ford Motor Company when I left the Navy. And then 14 months ago, I left Ford to join Chrysler. And I'm sure you all read the papers. The last 14 months has probably been the most tumultuous period in the entire auto industry, which has affected the entire economy. I've lived 14 months of, let's say, an experience that probably will never be matched again in my career. Hopefully not, anyways. But I will tell you that it's really great to be here. I will commend Paul Tafano and the entire Villanova Alumni Board and Gary for taking a concept, which I was a part when we met a year and a half ago to come up with something like this. So this was something I wasn't going to miss. I could have easily have dodged just saying that I had personal reasons. I just left a job paying buku dollars and now I'm unemployed. But I tell you, I felt really good landing today. And frankly, seeing Father Peter as I walked in the door, he never misses anything. I snuck in the back door. And 26 years ago, I knew Father Peter. I was a freshman here on this campus, and it is because of this university that I have learned through all my experiences in the Navy, at Ford Motor Company, and even 14 months with Chrysler. And now I couldn't think of a better place to be than back with my Villanova family. And as we talk about the future leaders of our our industry, whatever it may be, there's two areas that I think I will focus on, and two of them are simply leading change and leading people, because those are two very important fundamental characteristics or DNA strands that I believe that going into the future are very, very important. And I've lived adapting to change. I've lived certainly adapting to leading people, and I think without those two core elements, I don't think you could succeed successfully into the future. So with that, I'm sure we'll get into Q&A, and certainly I'll welcome any questions that anybody has regarding what I believe it will take to succeed in the future. So Al, I know you had a few questions to start with.
So I had these wonderful discussions with both of our guests here today, and one of the initial questions I'd like to explore a little bit, and I would invite you all to also chime in, and that is the nature of communication and communication skills as a part of the DNA of future leaders. Steve had some very interesting insights about what he has experienced already in his career, and I maybe kick it off with your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just, one thing that was a surprise to me, even to being up on technology, is how quick everything has been changing. And we all talk about the speed of that, and I think that as a leader in any type of industry, you've got to open your eyes to everything around you. It's impossible to keep up with everything, as we all know. It doesn't matter how much of a technology person you are, or any new software. You've got to surround yourself with people that are aware of these other ways to communicate, and not just in a management standpoint. Because really, what I do in this small company is more of project management. We don't have a huge staff, but we have a lot of things going on, from sales to technology to transportation. And you couldn't do that 10 years ago without all these tools. You need 20, 30 people in each department, but we can do it because we have the ability to do things like the internet, obviously, and international sourcing. I mean, we make most of our stuff overseas, but something that's changed a lot, and from working in Air Products where I spent 3 years, there was always a communication. If you had to buy something, or you had to source something or have a meeting, you went and there was face-to-face. I often don't ever meet my suppliers, and often I won't even talk to them because their English isn't that great. And we use a lot of internet exposure. We're even doing, believe it or not, we've even have this virtual interaction on Facebook with suppliers now, because we have no other way to really have a personal communication. So things that I never would have thought even 5 years ago. And to tell everybody else in my company that we can spend the time to communicate virtually and still get the product that we need and the time that we need is something that that's changed so quick that I think that that's going to be even more so. I mean, I can't even imagine 5 and 10 years from now how quickly things will move. So that's one thing that I think is vital for anybody in a company or going into a company, to be aware that the old way changes every 6 months, maybe every 3 months, and we just have to be very, very aware of everything that's around us.
So Steve, in your own career, have you already seen this particular aspect accelerating or changing from when you started to now?
Yeah, and I think that the biggest change isn't that there have been people doing this for years, but now the amount of people and the amount of interaction and the continuous interaction. I mean, if I'm not sending the emails and stuff to Taiwan at night, there's an instant, both on the consumer level, they want gratification right away, and suppliers want answers right away. It's changed our world to a point where, unfortunately, it makes our job never stop. But at the same time, you want the customers, they want answers, they expect it right away. You want something to get done, and it has to happen. Now, even 5 years ago, the communication level, we didn't have all these PDAs. You could wait till the next day or maybe 2 days. But and that's part of what I think is driving everybody here a little crazy sometimes. We could use multiple people with all the same PDAs so they can answer the questions. But unfortunately, it's changed so quick that to stay on top of the game, everybody's going to have to figure out a way to better manage that, and it's just the reality now.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned something to me yesterday, and I'd like to revisit that, and that is you brought up this thing you're talking about, in essence, speaks to one of those DNA strands, which is trust. Right. And you said something phenomenal to me that I'd never thought about, is that you have to be able to deeply trust people you've never met. And that's a new concept to me.
Yeah, that's certainly, yeah, and going back to my first few years in the corporate world, again, you never did a deal or certainly a contract with somebody that you haven't really met. And I think, unfortunately, you know, the bigger companies still have the resources to do that, but most of us aren't working in big companies anymore. And, you know, even if we are, there's these little units that operate independently. So we have to find out new ways to trust suppliers and people that you depend on, because there's not enough time anymore to do everything. And some of those tools are these social networking sites like LinkedIn. And, you know, you can get a little bit of information about somebody's, maybe the personal side and the family, and although it's not the same warm fuzzies that we used to. It used to be dinner and a beer or what have you, and now it's a little bit different types of communications that is, even in the last 10 years, has changed a lot. And I think that's certainly the students, they understand that, because I mean, I'm sure everybody that's in the classroom see that it's hard to get them away from their little digital devices, so they might be used to it. But for people that are hiring these people and people that are managing these people, you might have to get used to them putting smiley faces at the end of the sentences. I mean, it's happening, right? So it's definitely changing.
Interesting. Peter, I wonder if you can add any comments about your own experience? Or
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the key characteristics of our future leaders is this ability to adapt to change. And I'm near and dear to that, because I think all of you can relate. And as you've seen what happened to the industry that I was part of just in the last 14 to 15 months, it was something that most say that nobody could have ever forecasted it would have happened. 2008 was a disastrous year after an industry that was selling 16, 17 million cars and trucks a year for 6 or 7 years, and all of a sudden, you know, everything collapsed, from the fuel prices to the economy to credit, and it literally took the entire industry that I was a part of and led it to where it almost became, where you had two big companies like Chrysler and GM go bankrupt, which I think many would have never guessed could happen. And certainly that is what happened. And I think, you know, one of the things that any leader needs to focus on going forward is to make sure that they embrace and cherish competition. I mean, that's something that is so vitally important, is to understand your competition. And even companies like Toyota today, who, you know, you'd argue was at the top of their game, is reporting, you know, the biggest losses that they've ever seen. And certainly a company that used to work for, Ford Motor Company, is obviously on the rise based on knowing the competition. But any given moment, any given day, you know, the competition, if you don't stay on your game, if you don't stay true to understand the competition, could really affect, you know, your company, your organization, your team. And I think the most important thing is to cherish and embrace competition. And that's a piece that I clearly have learned, whether it's from my personal life, whether it's through working with a company like the two that I worked for the past 15, 16 years. But that's an emphasis. That's something that teaching anybody going into the future, they've got to understand competition. So that to me is vitally important.
And in your career, have you seen the rate at which change occurs change itself?
Sure. I think the best example is when I left a very sound, stable company, Ford Motor Company, 14 months ago, and kind of went from the frying pan into the fire when I joined Chrysler. However, you know, I've always said that I don't look back. I never look in the rearview mirror. I think everything happens for a reason, but the change was overnight. Obviously, a company that clearly I wasn't sure was going to end up in bankruptcy did end up in bankruptcy, but that came overnight. But, you know, I think what got me through it is the courage, and obviously what got me through it was obviously the confidence that I had to have, and also the leadership role that I had to play for the people that worked for me, because I had a number of people that relied on me. Every day I came to work, and they were looking at me as their leader to get us through, even though it wasn't going to be one person, you know, that was going to save the company. I was one of 8 business centers in the country that was obviously part of a company that was quickly sinking. But, you know, the good news was that we entered into bankruptcy and then came out of bankruptcy. And we actually became partnered with a global company who's obviously well known for turning around their own situation back in '04. And it was through persistence, and it was through constant communication, to Steve's point, that I was able to lead the folks that were coming to work every day with me to get through this, and that's certainly what we did. Now, I'm happy to say that Chrysler is part of a global company that has plans in place, and we'll be announcing shortly what those plans are. And it's very encouraging to see those that stood by me and that I continue to lead every day make it through what seemed like an insurmountable situation and actually arise from that, and they're in a better place now. So, but change happens quickly all the time, and you have to be prepared. You can never be really prepared for it, but when you know that it's there, and you know that you can get through it with knowing the competition, you can achieve anything you want.
So I'm an academic person, I'm a teacher, and as I admitted a while ago that I'm a skeptic about leadership training. I was a skeptic because my perception is that leadership is hard to teach. Either you got it or you don't. It's sort of an attitude, which is a bit of a simplistic attitude, but I wanted to ask you both to comment about what have been some of the things you have learned that you didn't know before you left the university, that is lessons in leadership that you have learned, and how did you learn them? Because those are the lessons that then we can teach our generation of students going forward.
Well, I can certainly start by saying I remember one of the first things when I used to teach leadership and management here. They were Villanova seniors who were about to graduate and enter the military as junior officers. And I used to say, if you learn anything about this class this semester, it's about leadership, and leadership's about caring, for one. But I also said that you can learn more about leadership from the poor leaders that you'll have an experience in life, which is true. But in that regard, I want to say that I think that a very important part of learning leadership is having mentors. Mentors in your career. I can say that, in fact, a gentleman who was a Villanova alum, 64 grad here, Jim O'Connor, who many of you know, was a mentor of mine when I first left the military. Entered a very foreign industry that I had never known anything about, and I left the military and went to Ford Motor Company, and through his guidance and leadership and his beliefs and values, he was a true mentor, as a friend, as a Villanova alum, and also as an executive Ford that obviously guided me as I had opportunities and challenges through my career, and to this day, he's been a strong supporter and mentor to me that's allowed me to, at times come to a crossroads where I wasn't sure the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, a leader has courage, a leader knows the right decision, and certainly I think mentors play a key role in leadership.
Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of extend on that, because that's certainly one of the things that allowed me to build our little company and really get things out there is to have other mentors, and certainly the way that we grew our companies with investors and people that knew how to strategically place it. But because of everything that was happening so quickly, I was able to surround myself with a lot of other peers and other people that knew much more about the industry I was in without having the normal company resources. So I reached out through communication around the country to people who knew about the motorcycle industry so I could educate myself. And I think yesterday we talked a little bit about being humble and being able to say, I don't know, not only do I not know most of the stuff, I always went into the perspective that I don't really know anything about this, and I'm going to get as much information. And as long as you can lead the rest of your group to say it's okay to not know those answers, that you have to do that, otherwise you'll just go down the wrong roads. And I think that's certainly a lesson that's not changed from any type of past company, and it's just that there's so much more things happening around you now that I think is more important now than ever to surround yourself with people that are up on what's going on. And because of that, you're able to make the right decisions by listening to everybody else, even more so now, I think, than when you had support and things didn't happen quite as quick.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is something like this. It sounds like tomorrow's leaders, the core values that we always have known that are the core values required for effective leadership, most of them are still there. Most of them are important, always will be important, right? I didn't know anything about Genghis Khan before my son read the book. Then I read everything I could about him because he was a great leader, whether you like what he did or not. He's a great leader. So it goes back a long way, those core values. But what I'm also hearing is there are some emerging things that would cause us to grow differently for leaders. Communication is still a very important core value, but the way in which we communicate is really different. The rate at which things happen, the change, the adaptation that you have to make, that's sort of a mutation of the way we currently do things, because people my age, we're used to doing things a certain way, and we are a little bit more reluctant to change, and change rapidly. It takes us out of our comfort zone. So what I'm hearing is that one of the new genetic makeup of future leaders is complete comfort with things changing overnight. And I guess you've experienced it personally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to open things up to the audience to know if anyone has anything to add to our comments.
Hi, I'm Al Martinez-Fonts, Class 71. Peter, great to see you.
You too, Al.
Dr. Ortega started this with talking about what are the important parts of the DNA that are needed. You know, whether it's Ford, Chrysler, Steve, whether it's your company, I mean, a lot of smart people, a lot of good people, a lot of very hardworking people. What was missing? What was missing, or what is missing when these companies, and by the way, we could take it in the financial industry. We've seen that debacle there. I mean, I think the airlines in this country are in lots of trouble because of things. What's missing out of those core things that were talked about?
One of the other things I started to say earlier was it's leading people, and what I mean by that is I believe that there's a greater opportunity for leaders of any organization to take more time and dedication to develop people. I think that's in my career I've seen good leaders and I've seen bad leaders, but even the good leaders, they need to take the time, because there's a reason why they got to where they were at. And I believe that there's a huge opportunity for dedicating the time to develop people, to challenge them, to give them stretch opportunities and hold them accountable, and actually allowing them to make mistakes, because nobody's perfect. And as I think back in the different careers that I've had, the best leaders were the ones that took the time to develop people. And I believe that's one of the most important requirements of any good leader, is to take the time to develop your people and then retain key talent. So one of the things that I saw both at Ford and Chrysler is that very, very good talent left. When they saw that the sink was shipping or things weren't good, I mean, a good leader is going to identify the key talent, the high potential folks, and keep them. And I think that's one of the things that's missing.
Could I just call on one special guest here today, sitting in the back row over there, and that's Dan Gelwitz, Mechanical Engineering Senior, and the president of the senior class, who is the youngest member in the audience, I believe.
Thank you, Dr. Ortega. Like he said, my name is Dan Gelwitz. I'm serving this year's student body president. I'm senior mechanical engineer, so class of 2010. Proud Chicagoan, so to go back, there you go. But I guess my comments had a lot to do with the change, and you guys addressed a lot of that. But in terms of dealing with the change, especially with dealing with the different types of communication, I know a challenge for me is that we see so many different types of communication, and relying on one, and it changes the next day and changes the next day. And so I guess that integration of new leaders who are experienced in all these different changes into the world ahead of me as I graduate, and how to prepare for that and prepare for that change, and to deal with all that.
That's a tough question, because I think that things are happening so rapidly. But I think that to get ready for everything that's going to happen out there is almost impossible for everything. I mean, I think that the willingness to just adapt and not think that your world's collapsing when you go into work and something's just completely different than it was supposed to be, or even you get into a job that doesn't turn out. I think just the willingness to accept the fact that there's no certainty anymore. The days of staying in the same company for a long time are likely gone. And so, not that this is not to scare you, but I mean the thing is that I think that we need to be aware, both as leaders and managers, that we try our best to have some stability in a company, and as an employee, you can help out in knowing what's going on around you too. So I don't think that's much of a solid answer, but maybe just some words of wisdom there. But.
Anything to add?
What I would add is we talked about the different forms of communication today, whether it's email, texting, and social networking. One of the things that I do believe is there's nothing like the good old-fashioned face-to-face. I mean, I think it's so easy today, especially as a leader, to send emails or texts, or have your secretary leave a message or write a memo to somebody. And to me, the good old-fashioned face-to-face sometimes is the best way to communicate. Even as you interview. The thank you notes via email and text certainly are appropriate, but the good old-fashioned letter is still fine. And me, I'm kind of old-fashioned in that way, but I think face-to-face communication is still very important, or even just picking up the phone. Nobody picks up the phone anymore. To me, picking up the phone and actually having a live conversation, if you can do that, is very important. So I recognize that there's so many ways to communicate today, but if I were coming out of college today and realizing they're so easy to send a text or an email, the good old-fashioned pick up the phone or face-to-face communication is still very valuable. So that's what I'd offer.
We had other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jack Quinlan, class of '54, when the abacus was just coming out of. I have two sons that graduate of Villanova, both of whom occupy important positions in international companies. I watch them operate with their PDAs. I mean, I have two questions for them, and I have them for you. How do you deal with, one, I always found that if a problem came up in the afternoon, if you stuck it in your drawer and let it steep, that by the next day, a lot of problems had solved themselves. And I challenge my boys, I say, are you dealing with problems that if you left them alone for a little bit would be okay? The second question is, consistent with that, how do you avoid upward delegation, which I always found a challenge with my staff? And when they'd bring their monkeys into my office and tell me about their problems, and when they left, I'd say, take your monkey with you. It's very easy with PDAs, et cetera, to one, try to solve a problem that if you left it alone for a few minutes, it would go away. Secondly, if you not take the other guy, your subordinate's problem. Just any views on that would be appreciated.
Questions?
Two very good questions. Actually, I'll start with the second one in terms of the upward delegation. I think what I've learned, and that happens a lot in staff meetings, and it's easy, as your leader, for those that work for you to come to you to provide solutions. But one of the things that I've always asked of my subordinates or those working for me is that if they have a problem, come to me with a solution, come to me with a recommendation, come to me with suggestions so that I can offer my insight and my opinion, because hopefully I've had experience with something that I could offer something up. And I think that's always helped. I don't mind issues that are raised in the nature of my work the last 15 years. There have always been problems that arise, and everything seemed to be a crisis. But I never allowed that to continue without recommendations and solutions that could be potential things that we could execute. Now, regarding your first issue on letting things sit for a while, and sometimes you can do that. I think sometimes that is the best approach. You don't always have to react to a problem, and sometimes when you react too quickly, it's the wrong approach. So sometimes there are decisions that can't wait. But I would agree that for the most part, as you prioritize issues, certainly waiting 24 hours on something will probably result in something better. And I do subscribe to that. That's something that I certainly practice when I can. So.
Yeah, to that second point, I'm probably as guilty as your sons. It's almost, they called them crackberries, and they had all kinds of other names for these PDAs. But part of the problem is because of constant access that you almost feel obligated. So it's another skill that we're all learning, and I think it's only been a couple of years, and it's almost you gotta work with that on a personal level so that you don't jump the gun. And it can easily happen, like you said, especially if it's a fiery situation. I mean, to respond in a way that you otherwise, if you could just relax a little bit, or everybody's done that, or in a better situation where it'll solve itself. So that comes down to one thing, that maybe they have to start a new class on like PDA training, or like the lessons of PDA, because it's almost they had computer classes, right? And how do you do that? But I mean, everybody knows how to use it, but do you really know how to use it? And that's there's some etiquette and stuff that needs to be taught, I think, too.
Absolutely.
It's a learned thing.
Well, one of the etiquette things might be, do you start a text message with "Dear so-and-so," or you just leave it off? You know, that was one of the things I had to learn, not to be offended when a student emails me and doesn't say "Dear Dr. Ortega." After a while, I realized it was just for efficiency's sake, and it wasn't anything personal.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, I'm Joe Denny, class of '68. My question is, there's been a lot of talk here about change and being ready for change and you know, how quickly you adapt to it. It always seems to me that one of the problems you have to grapple with is something comes along as the next big thing, and then 2 years later, everyone's completely forgotten about it. It didn't turn out to be anything at all. And other things come along that are real change, that really are going to be the next big thing. And what, you know, mechanisms do you have to try to sort through I think leaders that can truly identify what the next big thing is, you know, have a great advantage over others, and those that, you know, zip off down every path of the next great big thing that turns out to be nothing at all. You know, you can waste an awful lot of time and money. And, you know, do you use any mechanisms to try and sort out which is which?
It's a good question, because you can imagine in the auto industry, you know, hybrid technology, you know, CNG, you could think about all the different electric cars are coming out. I think it always goes back to what are the core strengths of your company. I think you have to stay close to what you do best and make sure that obviously you have a research and development team that's constantly looking at the best, and hopefully you have, you know, all the right dollars invested in those organizations that will help you define that. But I think, you got to stay true to what you're best at, you know, and just a perfect example of that is, you know, for many years, you know, Ford Motor Company, you know, built great cars and trucks. And then during a period, they started to veer off into various different industries that weren't just building cars and trucks. And they kind of rode on this crest of building trucks and SUVs, which made the company lots of money, instead of staying true to what they used to build, which was great cars. And fortunately, they've been able to come back and go back to building great cars, and they're going to start building great cars in the near future with their global technologies. But I think simply put is stay true to what you're best at doing, and your teams will identify the best opportunities for you going. And obviously, it takes a great deal of research. And again, it gets back to this concept of making sure you embrace and cherish your competition, because you'll end up where it's important to be. And I think at the end of the day, you have a good, solid team that's constantly looking at the competition, you'll end up in the right place.
So with that, I'm going to give the floor back to Paul. Thank you all very much.